Dear students, it is time to discuss the number one, the largest expense item on our cash flow statement for the vast majority of people, and that is housing. Selecting and financing housing, or as I like to call it, home sweet home. A third of Americans now spend at least 30% of their income on housing. That's the federal definition of an unaffordable housing burden. Hey, Southern California, 50% is lucky. Indeed, that's the price we pay to live in this wonderful culture and climate. Oh well, nothing's perfect. Let's get started. Slide number 2. Evaluating housing alternatives. Your lifestyle, your choice of housing, how you spend your time and money, your lifestyle affects your housing choice, and personal preferences are modified by financial factors. Oh, yeah. Traditional financial guidelines suggest you spend no more than 25 to 30% of your take home pay on housing, or no more than 2.5 times your annual income for a home. Whoever authored this, whoever came up with this rule of thumb, obviously doesn't live in San Diego or one of the other major metropolitan areas on the left coast and the right coast, because obviously housing is much more expensive on the coasts than it is in the middle of the country. Although my understanding is Chicago can be quite expensive. Right, of course, people are paid a whole lot more, so it just makes sense. But no, it's a problem on the coasts. Should you rent or should you own? Now you're going to hear people, usually real estate agents and other people in the industry, tell you that, oh no, you don't want to rent a house. Oh no, rent an apartment. That's just throwing your money away. Now you know what? I would be more amenable to trust their decision if they said the same thing about food or clothing. Hey, you don't want to buy food. You don't get to keep it. Your clothing is eventually going to fall off. No, no, no. You need, unless you want to live outdoors, you need shelter, right? It's one of the 4 basic things that we need: food, clothing, and shelter, and internet access. And so renting is a viable alternative. And there are some advantages. If you know you're not going to stay in a certain location, for more than a year or two, it just doesn't make sense to go through the rigmarole, the pain and suffering and anxiety, buyer's remorse it's called, that people go through to buy a home here in Southern California, in San Diego. You don't have to deal with maintenance costs. That's the problem of the landlord. And initially the costs are going to be lower. All other things being equal, and they of course never are, renting in the short term is going to be cheaper than owning. Now, over the long term, depending on where you are, right, owning has some major advantages in that, the rent can't go up, right, because you own it. And but then there's situations that you have to worry about with how you finance it. But in general, and it sounds like a test question, huh? Right, exactly. All other things being equal, in the short term, renting should be cheaper than owning. Now, are there disadvantages to renting? Well, yeah, there are fewer financial benefits, but that's not always true, especially if you get suckered into buying something much higher than it should be and then go through bankruptcy or foreclosure, as thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people did in the mid 2000s with the global financial crisis and the Great Recession and the housing bubble. It's true that you don't own the place, so there's no growth in equity, and you do typically have a restricted lifestyle. Can't paint the place purple. even though people do, they will, you're not supposed to do things, it's in the lease without talking to the landlord, but people do it anyway. There's the lease, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, and the security deposit, the utilities, the renter's insurance. Renter's insurance. Wait a minute. Do people have renter's insurance? I was surprised. It's about the number that I've found, and if you can find a better number, nationwide, it's about 40%. And now, of course, that's nationwide. I don't know too many people who rent here or actually buy renter's insurance. And we'll discuss that actually in our next chapter in more detail. There is a very valuable benefit you get from renter's insurance that has nothing to do with the place you're renting, nothing to do with your items that you have or anything like that. And we'll discuss that in the next chapter. Now, you need to do a search. I always find it is good to talk to people who live where you're interested in living. And now you might know the neighborhood inside out, but definitely there was some of my friends. This is when over 20 years ago, when downtown San Diego, that is, was being revitalized, and they wanted to move downtown, and they didn't bother to ever sleep downtown before they lived downtown. And then that train whistle in the middle of the night went off, and they thought, this is for the birds, right? Before signing the lease, make sure the dates, the cost, the facilities are clearly represented. The advice is to talk to a lawyer about any unclear lease aspects. But if you are reading something and you can't understand it and they can't explain it to you to the point where you understand what you're getting yourself into, then I would just walk away. I mean, unless you're really excited about the place. But if there's stuff in the lease that really doesn't look good, it's probably a bad sign. Do what's called a walkthrough. Check in, check out, walk through. Make sure everything that needs to be replaced or repaired is just described in the initial walkthrough, so they don't try to hit you with it on the way out. And if 2 people or 3 people or whatever sign the lease, any one person can be held responsible. So if your roommate takes off for Aruba or somewhere far away and you're still here, they can come after you. Yeah. Most leases have a provision that if you vacate the place before the lease is up, say it's 6 months, typical month to month here, but 6 months or a year, they can still come after you for the 6 months or year's worth of rent, but then rent it out to somebody else because you vacated it. Yeah, here are just a few of the items that you will see in a lease. And folks, always remember, the lease exists to protect the landlord. Do you understand? Now, there's a couple of, especially one landlord photo on the website, Landlord's Nightmare. Yes, some landlords, they're not the best people, and some are good people. It's kind of like teachers and policemen and doctors. There's some real horrible out there, and some actually pretty decent individuals. So do your best to keep your side of the bargain, right? Keep your side of the deal. Keep the place in the best you can. And of course, if there is a problem, it's the landlord's responsibility to take care of it. So read all these details of the lease and realize there's a whole lot more. I just read these leases and I can't believe they're telling me that you can't do illegal drugs or sell illegal drugs or make illegal drugs on the premises. Like, duh. Well, if they don't put that in the lease, here, I learned this. I thought, this is ridiculous. If they don't put that in the lease and the tenant does, the DEA, the Department of whatever it is, the Drug Enforcement Agency, can say, you knew they were doing that. We're taking your property. I thought, that's ridiculous. But hey, they can do it. So that's why it's in the lease. That's why it's in there. Don't cook methamphetamine in your second bedroom. So if you demonstrate, slide number 6, if you can demonstrate you're a good tenant, the landlord should keep your rent increases to a minimum because a good tenant is worth the lower rent to a landlord. One tenant can cost the landlord tens of thousands of dollars. Just an eviction in the days after COVID has become $4,000 or $5,000 to get a person out of the house. At the end of the lease, clean and leave the unit in the same condition you got it. Provide the landlord with the new address for deposit. Require any deductions from your deposit be documented. And realize that the laws in California, at least, definitely are tilted towards the renters because we put a premium in California on people's homes, even if they don't own it. So don't let the landlord bamboozle you. Make sure everything is documented, and you should get your deposit. If you deserve it, you should get it back. Don't be a wimp. Go after them. Go after that bum. Now, so that was renting. Let's talk about owning. The American dream can turn into a nightmare, and it did for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. We saw that we can deduct the mortgage interest and the property taxes and some state income taxes and the like. We build equity by paying down the loan, and of course, housing prices tend to go up over time, although not always in a straight line. It's what we call a hedge, protection against inflation. Your credit rating, the credit agencies love folks who own, and in general, you get to express your individuality more than if you rented. And if you wanted to paint your house purple, well, wait a minute. There are some areas where you have what are called CCRs, conditions, codes, and restrictions, that say you can't paint your house purple, which we're not in one of them, my wife and I. And if we were, I'd probably want to paint my house purple just to. I don't want to paint my house purple, but you get the idea. Some housing, depending on where you live, restricts your individuality. But in general, you get to do a whole lot more than if you rented the place. What are some of the disadvantages of owning? And now, look, folks, when I do this, I've had a couple of real estate agents in my class jumping up and down, screaming at me, "What are you trying to do? Stop them from making the most important decision of their life." At first I say, no, the most important decision of your life is who you marry. But yes, I agree. Buying a home, if you plan on living there, this is your home, this is the place you want to live in. Yes, I'm all for buying a home. But I want you students, I want you folks to have your eyes wide open and realize that nothing's perfect, right? Nothing that we humans have ever created is perfect. So we have to keep our eyes open about the downsides. What are some of the disadvantages of owning? Well, financial uncertainty, getting the down payment, getting the financing, realizing that, yes, house values can drop. Not typical, but it happens. And people used to go, yeah, right. Then they were saying, yeah, right. Oh, my goodness. I'll never forget having a student in my class saying, my real estate professor said housing prices never go down in San Diego. This was 2005 or 6. I said, really? Were they in business in 1990 when they went down, 1991? They've gone down in the past. They'll go down in the future, but over the long term, indeed. It's not as though San Diego is becoming less desirable to live in. We got traffic. Oh, well, as I said, you might have heard in another quick presentation. All you got to do is go spend a few days up in LA, and you'll never complain about San Diego traffic again. There's the limited mobility we talked about. If you are thinking of leaving within a year, you're going to be transferred somewhere, it just doesn't make sense to buy. It's such an ordeal. And then selling is an ordeal too. That we talked about the conditions, codes, and restrictions, the zoning that may limit your ability to do things with your home. And then in general, sound like a test question, it will be more expensive in the short term to buy, comparing like to like uh, uh, properties, than to rent in the short term. Over the long term, that can be much cheaper, depending on what happens with rents and depending on what happens with your financial situation. But yes, in the short term, buying is going to be almost always more expensive than renting. Now, you will hear people say this, especially when they find out that you teach investments or you're a stockbroker or whatever, and they don't want to really admit that they screwed up when it comes to their little chance that they little things, little chances they took in the stock market didn't work out too well. They say, "Well, my house is the best investment I've ever made." And then when you sort of start asking them more questions, they go, "Yeah, well, it's pretty much the only investment I ever made, except for that penny stock my brother-in-law, the ex-stockbroker, conned me into buying, but that stuff's worthless now. And those gold coins I bought way back when the Gulf War, the first Gulf War started back in 1990. What do I do with those things anyway?" Look, in my humble opinion, a house is a home first and investment second. Now you're going to hear differently. You're going to hear people say different. They're going to say, "No, no, 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 you don't understand. This is a great investment. You're going to buy here where this area is up and coming, and then 4 or 5 years you'll sell that, and then move to this area, and you'll work your way up and you know what? They're usually real estate agents, and they're thinking about commissions or maybe mortgage brokers. Don't worry, we'll insult everybody by the end of the semester." So, in my humble opinion, and you take it for what it's worth, the house is a home first and investment second. But what about San Diego, huh? Yeah, well, prices in San Diego have come down in the past. They will go down sometime again in the future. Actually, they're starting to go down right now. This is what is this? It's October 2022. Interest rates have spiked, and we've seen a slowing. I think it still hasn't started to drop, although I've looked, if you go look at the Zillow presentation, which I've already done, some of the houses that we looked at have fallen in price. So it looks like housing is falling. Not by much. And of course, it skyrocketed the last few years, so it's not a big deal. Not a big deal yet. But again, it's not as if San Diego is all of a sudden becoming an undesirable place to live. If you plan on staying here, by all means, buy what you can afford. I don't know about you, but I think San Ysidro and National City are two of the best values in the region. People go, "Oh, you live in National City." I say, "Oh, yeah, it's horrible. I ride my bike through there on my way to Southwestern." I haven't done that in a while, but they have houses and cars and shopping centers and kids. It's a really scary area. And IB is also a great beach value, but there's nothing cheap at the beaches anymore. My goodness, the prices. Speaking of insane Diego, do you own your own home? And this is the A, B, C, D cards that we have in class. And if you do not own, do you plan on purchasing a home in San Diego? And we try to get people talking. "Yeah, I want to do it." "Oh, maybe, but not for many years." "No, I'll continue to rent here, or I'm moving to a cheaper area." And in the face-to-face class, you'd be surprised how many people choose D. They know that I can't afford to buy a house here. I'm not even going to try. I'm going to go somewhere cheaper. I got friends and family who live maybe in Arizona or Nevada, or maybe in the South somewhere, or Chicago. I'm going to Chicago. You ever been through the winter yet? But yes, so think about it. Think about it. Do you want to live in San Diego? And if so, are you determined to buy? Which is why we did goal setting back in chapter 1, right? Start that goal. This I saw, I'm pretty old, folks, in 1993 up in North County. You have to go back and realize that in the 1970s, prices started, late 1970s, in California, prices started to levitate. Just insanely so, because everybody wanted to move here, yours truly included. "I'm originally from Philadelphia. It's a good place to be from, far from." It's great for food and the culture and the history, but the weather is so evil. Anyway, in the 1980s, prices levitated to the point where in 1991, there was a recession here, and prices just plummeted 20-25%, which for real estate is a big deal. And so I saw this in North County, and I laughed so hard. I talked with the woman who was over her desk. Please, God, let there be another real estate boom, and I promise I won't piss it all away this time. You think she did it in the 2000s? I don't know. I lost track, but I just laughed so hard. So, yeah, the air came out of the bubble in 91, 92, 93, and prices fell about 20-25%, depending on where you were. Now, that's very different than 2000 and 2009. That's what I thought was going to happen. My buddy and I were saying, oh, housing is way too expensive. Things are going to come down. I thought 20-25%. He said, no, 50% or more. I said, Jim, you got to go back to the Great Depression to see prices fall that far. He was right. And if you go through the presentation on the option ARM, the optional adjustable rate mortgage, I speak more about what happened. Okay, what are the main elements of buying a home? Well, you're going to hear the real estate agents say there are 3 important elements: location, location, location. Yeah, very funny. The big problem is the down payment. Where do you get it? Now, here is an exception to what we said back in chapter 5 when we said don't lend to your friends, don't borrow from your family. Here is a situation where it makes sense. Think of it like a business. The parents, the grandparents have some money to put down. The young couple or individual starting out in their 20s doesn't. So the parents or the grandparents put the down payment down. The young couple or the individual lives in the house, the condo, whatever, makes the payments, keeps it up, and now everybody's name is on the title, right? As the house increases in value, both parties, the young couple or the individual, and the parents or the grandparent or the one, it doesn't have to be 2 people, they share in the equity, meaning if it goes up 100,000, they each get 50,000 if the house were to sell. Or typically what happens is the young couple will refinance and be able to pay off the parents. So it's actually a very smart thing to do, especially in areas like San Diego where it's very difficult to come down with the down payment, but the real estate is valuable. It doesn't have to be family. It can be a business entity, an individual lender, but whatever, make sure you have a very good real estate lawyer. Let me say that again. You need a lawyer. Don't do it on a handshake. No, 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 no. You need a good lawyer to draw everything up on what happens if this, what happens if that, so there's no confusion. You want to get pre-approved. I'm going to probably say this 3 or 4 times, right? You want to go to your credit union, your mortgage broker, your bank. Credit unions are the best, and say, because this, and say, I'm interested. Here's my down payment. This is my income. Is my credit score. Because this is their business. They want to make loans. Don't worry. They're very happy to talk to you. But they also know what you can and cannot afford. And so you think you can afford this much. And then when you put the sales agreement, you say, yeah, here's my $5,000 as a sales agreement. And the mortgage company says, no, you can't afford that. Points. What are points? Well, there's a presentation on points. Points are what you get poked in the eye with. No, each point is 1% of the loan. You can think of it as a privilege of owning of getting the loan, and you'll go make sure you watch that presentation in the face-to-face class. Of course, we'd stop and discuss points. They're called closing costs because you close your eyes and sign, right? Well, that's not. No, you don't. It's a joke. But that's how you feel, because they're going to have you sign document after document after document, and you're going to go, what am I signing? You want to skim through it. You're not going to read it all. There's no way. No one can read it all. But you got to come up with the closing costs. This is on top of the down payment. And then Typically, most lenders now want you to not only pay the principal and interest, but they also want you to pay every month the taxes and insurance. Now, the insurance usually paid once a year, right? And the taxes are paid twice a year. Now, you got to know people down at the county admin building have this great sense of humor. The taxes are due at Christmas time and federal income tax time, December and April. Somebody had a great sense of humor. And so the mortgage companies don't want you to make your own payments. They're going to want you to pay every month, and then they'll make the payment because they want to make sure the insurance and the taxes are paid right. And then, of course, you have to pay the maintenance because you're your own landlord. Now, what type of house do you want? Single family dwelling, that's the white picket fence and the 2.3 kids and dog out in the yard. I don't know. I think a duplex is a better choice, or a triplex. Live in one, rent out the other, right? Townhouses are usually houses that are attached to one another. And then condominiums, which are more of a form of ownership because you don't actually own the building. They say you own the four walls. You don't really even own the four walls. And on the East Coast, you have what are called co-ops, cooperatives. And they're simple, similar to a condominium, but it's more like a business enterprise. And some of these things are very, very hoity-toity. But you don't. At least I've never seen them in San Diego. They might be in LA and San Francisco, but they're similar to condominium. You basically buy into the enterprise, and then you rent out one of the units. Very, very. And there's a very famous one where all the muckety mucks in New York live, the Dakota, and that's sadly I always remember this because that's where John Lennon was murdered in 1980. Yeah. Okay, slide number 16. Now, would you buy a trailer, a manufactured home, or a mobile home? You know what, folks? They're typically very well built. Now, the issue is the land. If you can buy the land underneath it, then it's a great idea. But in San Diego, most all the land is bought by the developers unless you go way out east. So that's an issue. But no, typically these houses are well built. And the problem is if you don't own the land underneath, they then are treated like an RV. They start to depreciate as opposed to if they are on the land and are connected to the land and that's your land, they tend to appreciate. So what are tips? Avoid buying a complete package because the dealers are not stupid. They're kind of like cars. They're going to want to get their financing through. They want you to finance through them along with a few other things, and that's where they make the money. So find the site first if you can. Get a warranty on the installation as well as the manufacturing because the installation is often the most troubling aspect. If they won't provide a warranty on the installation, then just walk away. And again, get pre-approved. Go to your credit union because they're going to want you to finance through them, and they typically will have it's like a car company. They're going to want you to finance through them, and the rate's going to be higher than if you went to your credit union. Okay, so last slide for now. We'll break and then come back. If you are considering building a home, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, make sure you get a good referral for a contractor because, folks, there are horror stories associated with contractors and with very good reason. We have one that just amazing. We cannot believe what these people did. They believed this guy. Our son played with their two little girls, and then it turned out that we weren't the right stock when their little girls went to the private school and our son went to the public school. So, okay, whatever. But we kept on good terms. They're around the block. They found a guy who told them that he could pull the roof off of their house, build a second floor in 2 weeks. And they believed him. That's the most incredible part. They believed this guy could do this in 2 weeks. They didn't talk to anybody else. Say, oh, yeah. Well, the guy rounds up a bunch of workmen, pulls the roof off, and then checks him into rehab. He had been unconscious for 6 weeks. He didn't remember the last 6 weeks of his life. And so they're telling us this horror story and how they have to move in with the parents, and it's going to be 6 months if they're lucky. 6 months. And we're just, I'm just thinking, oh boy, I was trying my best not to laugh because it just sounded, I was like, I wanted to say, you believe this guy he was going to do that? But no, I didn't. We just said, oh, it's so terrible. It's so terrible. So check out, do they have the experience? Do they have good subcontractors, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, architects? What assurances are you going to get about the quality? What are the payment arrangements? What do you have to pay? When do you have to pay it? What delays will be considered legitimate? What happens if there's a delay? Are they licensed, of course, and insured? So, yeah. And typically building a house in San Diego is something that most people don't do, again, because of the land. Unless they go way out east, in which case there's plenty of land, but you're way out east, and that's a different issue. Some people love it out there, but if you have to commute, oh my goodness, good luck. You know, I was really shocked. Actually, I'm not shocked, but I was amazed. I thought by now there'd be some high-speed rail or high-speed whatever that would connect parts of East County, up in the mountains, Jacumba Boulevard, with maybe even the desert with San Diego. I mean, this was, 30, 40 years ago we were talking about this. People were talking about having some kind of high-speed a rail or something that would, because, that's where the land is. But no, it hasn't happened. Oh, well. Okay, so when we come back, all right, so I hope you're enjoying this, folks. I hope it's not too depressing, because it's going to get a whole lot more depressing in our next presentation. When we come back, we're going to discuss the process of buying a home, and it's not called buyer's remorse for nothing. Then we'll discuss selling a home briefly and mortgage rates and mortgage payments. Now, the problem with teaching this stuff and taking the class is that nothing really is going to prepare you. I apologize. I'm going to tell you the truth. Until you go through it, you're going to just not know how scary it is and how anxious people are and how crazy it can be. What can I say? But we're going to do our best to have you face it with your eyes open and realize that you're not alone. Every year, tens of thousands of couples and individuals. The fastest growing segment of home buyers are single women. That's about 4 or 5 years old. I should really go check my data now. But women are just saying, guys, we're tired of you dummies. We're doing it on our own. So we'll see you in our next presentation when we discuss the steps of home buying and then a little bit about home selling and mortgage payments. See ya.